The world of Lordran is riddled with countless hurdles and obscene challenges, but the most striking anomalies lie just beyond the fog wall. We often just focus on the sheer difficulty of these encounters, but if we dissect the anatomy of their existence, we realize that the bosses in Dark Souls are weirder than you think. This unsettling nature isn't just for the sake of horror, it's a deliberate pillar of the game's design. These beings are distorted by the crushing weight of their own souls, corrupted by the abyss, deformed by failed attempts to play God, or hollowed out into brittle fragments in a desperate effort to rekindle a dying fire. Their physical design tells the story of their downfall before the fight even begins and you explore the lore behind them. A perfect example is Pinwheel, a pathetic multi-limbed stack of masks and cloaks that feels less like a singular entity and more like a desperate failed experiment in necromancy. This biological distortion is also seen in the Gaping Dragon, an evolutionary nightmare deformed by the pestilence of the depths and its mindless gluttony. Yet the most unsettling transformation is found in Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. No longer a god of sunlight, he remains only as a charred, hollowed-out husk clinging to a fading spark, a haunting shadow of his former glory. But to understand how a family became a cluster of masks, or how a god shrinks into a husk, we have to look beyond the surface-level gore and dive deep into what makes them weird. In the ruins of Lordran, some bodies have adapted into something that can only be described as evolutionary dead ends. These are creatures that have mutated so far into specific obsessions that they have lost the right to be termed as living. A perfect example of this would be the Gaping Dragon, whose sole existence is an evolutionary insult to its own lineage. It is a distant descendant of the primordial Archdragons, beings of stone and statues that existed long before the advent of fire or the emergence of man. However, over eons of isolation within the depths, the dragon was corrupted by the very impulses that defined the age of the lords: greed and gluttony. It has transformed from a noble immortal entity into a deformed abomination where the skeleton of its frame itself has surrendered the urge to consume. The weirdness here is the utter sickening subversion of its anatomy. When the creature first emerges, the player is presented with a small, almost pitiful lizard-like head. It is a vest remnant, a tiny sprout of draconic dignity that serves no functional purpose. This is a biological deception, as when the beast rears up, its entire torso splits asunder, revealing that its ribcage has not merely been exposed, but has evolved into a secondary gargantuan set of teeth that perpetually ooze corrosive acid. Also, it's rather strange that there is a channeler on the balcony above, buffing up the grotesque dragon. But why is a channeler an elite servant of Seath the Scaleless, known as Eyes of Seath, located at this sewage and filth-infested part of Lordran? I think Seath, a dragon born without the scales of immortality, may have been obsessively supervising this deformed descendant to study how the draconic form adapts to the pestilence. Alternatively, the dragon may have simply been a waste disposal system too efficient for the Duke to ignore. It consumes the unwanted discarded from the kitchen above, and the channeler ensured the furnace remained fueled and the experiment stayed alive. This leads us to the final encounter of weirdness, the Blighttown key found within the dragon's acid-stained remains. To any other creature, a key is a tool of progression. But here, it is a swallowed secret. The description of the key reads: Key to Blighttown from the depths of the undead berg, swallowed by the Gaping Dragon. Even the polluted inhabitants of the depths are aware of its dangers and built this mighty door in hopes that they could remain safely separated. It reveals that the key was swallowed by the Gaping Dragon, but how did it swallow it? I think it had eaten one of the inhabitants of the depths that held the key to Blighttown. The gaping dragon became the final absolute barrier between the polluted and the infected. The irony is kind of weird. The most terrifying monster in the series was actually acting as a biological lock, protecting the rest of Lordran from an even deeper rot. But if the gaping dragon is a failure of purpose, the bed of chaos is a failure of origin. It is the mother of demons, yet there is nothing maternal about it. It represents the total collapse of natural law, an attempt to play God that resulted in a structural nightmare. In a world of dragons and knights, the bed of chaos is a sprawling tangled knot of sentient roots and a molten core. It isn't a creature you can fight in a traditional sense. It is an environmental collapse. It is the peak of Izalith's weirdness, a goddess who tried to recreate the first flame and instead turned herself into a stationary wooden parasite that birthed an entire race of monsters. The boss is also weird in terms of mechanical design. While typical boss fights test your mastery of combat or a specific gimmick, this encounter forces a lethal game of platforming against a sprawling tree, a design that many consider the worst because it defies the core logic established through bosses like Ornstein and Smo. The traditional dance of hit and dodge is replaced by random, punishing platforming. And besides the mechanical tragedy of this boss in terms of actual lore, it exists in a state of eternal agonizing growth. Even its own daughter, Quaelana of Izalith, views its existence as a tragedy that needs to be put out.
I have a favor to ask. My mother, the Witch of Izalith, was one of the primeval lords. Her power came from the soul that she found near the first flame. She focused this power to light a flame of her own. But she failed to control it. The flame of chaos engulfed Mother and my sisters and molded them into deformed creatures. Only I escaped, and now I am here. But my mother and sisters have been in anguish since. I beseech you, free Mother and my sisters from the flame of chaos. I cannot do it myself. I lack the strength and the bravery. But you, I realize what I am asking. But please, free their poor souls. Mother's ambitions were misguided, no doubt, but surely 1,000 years of atonement is enough.
The desperate request for mercy killing frames the boss not as a monster to be conquered, but a mistake to be corrected. But there is one more layer to this tragedy, representing the weird nature of this creature. The item description of the soul of the Bed of Chaos highlights this. The Bed of Chaos is the source of all demons. It is a distorted being born from the ambitious attempt to duplicate the first flame. When you think of a source of all demons, you expect a towering devil, a lord of shadows and flames. But instead, at the center of this abomination lies a sprawling, chaotic entity that lacks even a central nervous system. It is a pathetic reality that the most powerful entities can shrink into the most insignificant forms when they fail to play God. But even among the gods, there is a final evolutionary weirdness that lies beyond the fog wall. Seath the Scaleless, unlike the ancient dragons that had stone scales, was born naked, pale, and vulnerable. He lacked this one feature that made his brethren eternal, a defect that would eventually curdle into a genocidal resentment. Yet, his physical weirdness isn't just found in his alluring crystalline skin. It's in the way he moves. Unlike any traditional dragon with powerful soaring limbs, Seath slithers through his arena on a mass of twitching crystalline tangles. He is a dragon that has been forced to mimic the movement of a snail. There is a chilling clinical subtext to his existence. After betraying his own race by revealing the secret of their scales to Gwyn, Seath was rewarded with a massive library of dukedom. But this is where the weirdness truly turns dark. He spent countless centuries obsessed with the mechanics of immortality, sending his channelers, specialized snatchers, to kidnap young maidens. These women were subjected to horrific experiments, eventually being transformed into the Pisakas, the blue, throbbing cephalopod monstrosities found locked within the archive cells. The ultimate anomaly, however, his roots of immortality. Seath didn't find a natural cure for his mortality, so he stole it. By pillaging the primordial crystal, a sacred treasure of the ancient dragons, he tethered his soul to an external object. As long as the crystal stands, Seath is functionally immortal, a god kept alive by a stolen battery. Leaving the cold halls of the archives, we descend into the most visually incoherent location in all of Lordran. Lost Izalith is a place where the chaos of a dying flame, and perhaps the chaos of a rushed development cycle, left behind centuries with the most illogical and unsettling designs in the series. Ceaseless Discharge is perhaps the most striking representative of this chaos. He is the only brother of the Daughters of Chaos and the youngest child of the Witch of Izalith. But while his sisters were transformed into powerful sentient hybrids, Ceaseless was simply devolved. The design of the being is but a marvel to gaze upon. I think of him as a living furnace that has lost its lid. Most creatures in Lordran possess a skin, a physical boundary that separates the self from the world. But Ceaseless has no such barrier. He's a mountain of sores and lava, a biological leak that cannot stop bleeding fire. His flesh melts as fast as it can regenerate, leaving him in a perpetual state of agony. There is a tragedy to his existence, described in the orange charred ring's description. Since his sores were inflamed by lava from birth, his witch sisters gave him this special ring. But fool that he is, he readily dropped it, and from that spot, a terrible centipede demon was born. This ring was the cure for his pain, but since it's the world of Dark Souls, even an act of love can become a parasite. When he dropped that ring, it didn't just sit in the lava. It sprouted legs, developed a mind of its own, and became the centipede demon. The very thing meant to heal him literally walked away and became a predator. This leaves him in a waste of permanent vulnerability. He is perhaps the most weirdly passive boss in the game. When you first encounter him, he is a non-hostile entity standing in a trance-like state. He is so agonized by the pain that he doesn't even bother fighting the chosen undead. But when you rob his sister's grave by taking her robes, in that moment, the mountain of flesh moves with a desperate, clumsy rage because you took the last scraps of his family's memory. He then falls off the cliff, instantly falling to his death. To me, the most weirdly unsettling aspect of Ceaseless isn't his size or his tragic, agonizing existence, but his loneliness. He survived the wars against Gwyn and his Silver Knights. He survived centuries of pain, only to remain here, gazing up at the cliffs where he believes his sisters are watching him. But they aren't. He is completely forgotten and totally isolated. A weeping wound at the ruins of hell, kept alive only by his eternal agony and a broken heart. This broken heart traces back to his sisters who have completely discarded him and left the ruins of Izalith to find their home right next to Blight Town.
Below us lies the ruins of the legendary city of Izalith. There, the molten giant watches over the flame of chaos. Our fair lady and Mistress Quaag fled from the ruins. I do not know the details, and I do not ask.
As we descend past the poison swamp, the damp wood of rusted iron of the infection give way to vast suffocating silence. This is Quaag's domain, a place where the atmosphere itself feels heavy with a structural claustrophobic rot. For anyone suffering from arachnophobia, this is where the world truly becomes indigestible. The atmosphere and the surroundings are weird in themselves. The tunnels are lined with eggs of humanity. Thousands of potential lives are suspended inside the eggs. Quaag represents the peak of this arachnophobia. Her existence is the violation of the golden ratio, a nightmare where the fair and the foul have been fused seamlessly to create a truly strange fusion. The woman is fused into a spider. No such boundary or space show the transition. It looks like it's forcefully put together. Her human half seems weirdly composed, even wearing a gleeful predatory smile, while the 8 legs below move with a weirdly rhythmic dissonance. I believe she lures in prey with her beautiful human form, just like a mermaid, but quickly ambushes them with the rest of her grotesque being. But the strange tragedy here is that she is not praying for sport or food. She does this to take the humanity from countless chosen undead to ease the pain of her dying sister.
Ah, a precious new sacrifice. Welcome, bringer of meat. The children of chaos are hungry. Give yourself to Quaag's flame.
In her cut dialogue, she mentions the chosen undead as a precious new sacrifice and a bringer of meat. She is the sole life support for her sister, who is blind, paralyzed, and dying. Initially, her sister is unresponsive to the player, but if you defeat the Centipede demon and acquire the old witch's ring to hear the silence broken, the tragedy is expanded. She imagines you as her sister and talks to you.
Quaag, please, sister. It hurts. Do not cry. I have you.
This is one of the few portions of the game where the weirdness is literally saddening. She has no idea that her comfort is paid for in the blood of every pilgrim who ever sought the bell. When you kill Quaag, you don't just beat her as a boss. You leave a blind dying saint in a state of eternal waiting and never fulfilling hope. But quite contrary to the emotional weirdness we have seen so far with the beings born out of the Chaos Flame, the Centipede demon is quite the opposite. Unlike Ceaseless Discharge and the Chaos Sisters who were mutated to form into grotesque beings, this abomination was a creature born of the Old Witch's ring, dropped by the Ceaseless Discharge. This is the weirdest origin story in Izalith. It suggests that the Chaos Flame is so volatile that it can imbue life into inorganic matter, turning an act of sisterly love and a healing ring into a predatory nightmare. It is as if the ring itself overhealed the lava, causing it to sprout legs and a mind of its own. The design of this creature induces nightmares. From afar, it looks like an amalgamation of weirdly oriented insects fused, but upon closer examination, it has 6 demonic centipedes' heads, 2 sprouting from its back, 2 acting as arms, and the final 2 forming its main head and tail. The weirdness extends to the fight itself, which is defined by a total lack of hospitable ground. When you step through the fog gate, you aren't greeted by an arena, but by a sea of lava. The Centipede demon stands far off in the distance, wading through the magma with complete immunity, while the player is forced to scramble along a tiny narrow strip of land near the entrance. The fight overall feels wrong because it is designed to be unfair. It is the manifestation of a world that has stopped catering to human logic. The Centipede demon is the peak of Izalith's creative weirdness, a monster born from jewelry, fighting in a lake of fire, made of pieces that refuse to die, even when they are cut off. As we ascend from the heat of Izalith into the hollowed-out halls of Anor Londo, the weirdness takes a chilling psychological turn. In most fantasy epics, the gods are radiant static icons of perfection. These deities are weird as they subvert every expectation of what a deity should be. Gwyndolin is perhaps the most uncomfortable deity in this franchise. He is the last remaining god in the City of Gods, acting as the director of a sun-drenched play where every inhabitant is a mere shadow. His weirdness is rooted in a fundamental rejection of his own nature, a god of the moon desperately pretending to be the sun. Gwyndolin was born weak and repulsive in the eyes of his father, Lord Gwyn. The source of all revolutions is his lower half. Beneath his ceremonial moonlight robes, Gwyndolin does not possess human legs. Instead, he is supported by a mass of writhing sentient serpents. In the lore of Lordran, serpents are imperfect dragons, symbols of parasitic and undead. For a member of a royal family to possess such features is very weird and total heresy. Because of his strong affinity for the moon, Gwyndolin was considered unusual among the sons of Gwyn. In Anor Londo, the moon was associated with femininity, and as a result, his natural grace and magical dispositions were viewed as more feminine than masculine. For this reason, he was raised as a daughter rather than a son. He was required to wear women's clothing and was given the reversal ring, an item that allowed him to move and behave in a traditionally feminine manner. The description of the robes read, "The power of the moon was strong in Gwyndolin, and thus he was raised as a daughter." This creates a layer of weirdness that is both tragic and unsettling. He is a god who has been conditioned to hide his true self, appearing only as a fleeting goddess to maintain the legacy of a father who found him repulsive. Gwyndolin's weirdness extends to the very architecture of Anor Londo. He is responsible for the illusion of Guinevere, the sunlight of the city is fake, a magical veil cast over a dark, cold reality. If you dare to pierce his veil by entering his tomb, he greets you with a voice that is both authoritative and fragile.
"Halt! This is the tomb of the great Lord Gwyn. Tarnished it shall not be by the feet of men. If thou art a true disciple of the dark sun, cast aside thine ire, hear the voice of mine self, Gwyndolin, and kneel before me."
The boss fight itself is also a spatial anomaly, the hallway of endless corridors that seems to defy the constraints of the cathedral. You are forced to chase a god who is perpetually retreating, teleporting further into the darkness while pelting you with moonlight arrows. What if Gwyndolin is a shadow hiding in an endless corridor? Then Gwyn is a fire that has already gone out. He is the peak of the divine spectrum, yet he represents the most profound weirdness in the entire game, because when you face him as the final boss, he is just a husk of what remained of him. In any other fantasy epic, the final boss is a towering titan of lightning and fury, a god at the height of his power. But Gwyn is weird, precisely because he is dying. He is a husked-out lonely man. When you fight him, you aren't fighting the Lord of Sunlight, who peeled the immortal scales off the dragons. You are fighting a Lord of Cinder, a title that literally translates to the King of Ash. The journey to Gwyn is the first indicator that the logic of divinity has collapsed. As you descend into the kiln of the first flame, the world starts to become an ash heap. You finally understand how the world felt after rekindling the first flame. It ended up saving the world, but ultimately turned everything into ash. Even the armor of the Silver Knights who accompanied Gwyn to link the first flame was burned to a color of charred black, and now roam the lands as disembodied spirits. The knights followed Gwyn when he departed to link the flame, but they were burned to ashes in newly kindled fire, wandering the world as disembodied spirits ever after. The disembodied spirits of the Black Knights can be seen roaming the kiln of the first flame. Just like their lord, they remained a husk of what they once were. But when you finally step through the final fog gate, the weirdness hits you immediately through the ears. There is no booming orchestra or melancholic choir. Instead, you are greeted by a lonely melancholic piano. Blin, blin, blon. It is the three-note melody of pure sorrow. It sounds like a funeral march for a man who is already dead. Visually, Gwyn is charred. His royal drapes are scorched. His crown is crooked, and his eyes are empty pits of ash. But it is the mechanics that stand out. As Gwyn is a boss that is very weak to parrying, it is the most ironic thing ever. The final boss, the Lord of Sunlight, who built Anor Londo, fought the Great Dragon, can be swatted aside by a basic human combat maneuver. He is fast, aggressive, relentless, but he lacks the weight of a god. He doesn't use special moves. He's too weak for that. He swings his greatsword, imbued with the fading embers of the first flame. Gwyn is probably the weirdest subversion because he is the final boss. A final boss who can be parried, trivialized, and ultimately pitied. He represents the anatomy of a husk, the physical proof that in Lordran, even the greatest divinity eventually becomes a pathetic, empty fragment of a memory. But there is one more creature who even the gods are scared of. Someone whose existence is so weirdly threatening that they built an entire reality just to hide her. She is tucked away in the painted world of Ariamis, a cold, isolated dimension accessible only through a massive canvas in Anor Londo. The weirdness begins with the environment itself. The painted world is a snowy, silent purgatory, a prison for the misplaced things of the world. It is an architectural anomaly, a place where the gods sent everything they found too weird or too dangerous to touch. Priscilla is a tall humanoid half-dragon, a weird crossbreed. She is visually jarring, with pale skin, stark white hair, and a thick, fluffy white dragon tail that emerges from her back. But her weirdness isn't just cosmetic, it's biological. She possesses the power of Life Hunt, an occult ability that is described as antithetical to the gods. The gods didn't exile her because she was a monster. They exiled her because she was their natural predator. The item description of the Life Hunt scythe reveals the terrifying truth. Even the gods feared Priscilla's Life Hunt ability, and in the hand of a mortal, its power will turn upon its wielder. The most weirdly unsettling aspect of Priscilla, however, is the boss fight. When you step inside, she doesn't roar or charge. She stands perfectly still and speaks to you in a soft melodic voice.
Who art thou? One of us thou art not. Thou must returneth whence thou came. This land is peaceful, its inhabitants kind, but thou dost not belong. I beg of thee, plunge down from the plank and hurry home.
She is the only boss in the game who offers you an exit without a fight. She pities you. In a world defined by savage gluttony and mindless fire, the most dangerous beings in existence are the only ones who ask for peace. If you choose to attack her, the fight becomes a mechanical nightmare. Priscilla turns invisible, and you are forced to track her not by sight, but by the weird rhythmic crunch of her footprints in the snow. When she kills you in a fight, she questions the chosen undead with heartbreaking confusion.
Why could thou not let us be? Didst thou not see why Ariamis created this world?
Her weirdness lies in her humanity. She is a genetic anomaly who chose to be a protector of the forlorn, while the gods who feared her became husks. She is the final proof that in Lordran, the most monstrous things are often the kindest, and the divine things are the most hollow. We now move to the final and perhaps the most disturbing segment of the spectrum. The metaphysical errors. While the previous bosses were physical or divine anomalies, these entities are weird as they break the logic of the soul, which is mostly individual. These creatures are a fusion of multiple beings combined to form some of the weirdest amalgamations ever seen in Dark Souls, and Pinwheel is the perfect introduction to this spectrum. He is the most pathetic entity in the entire franchise. When you drop into his candle-lit workshop at the catacombs, you aren't fighting a warrior, but instead a multi-limbed stack of masks and cloaks. From a surface level, Pinwheel just looks like a grotesque monster, no different from the horrors witnessed throughout Lordran. But when you dig deeper into the coffin, you realize that Pinwheel is a fusion of three people who were individual entities before. A mother, a father, and a child. Physically and spiritually compressed into a single staggering frame, each head wears a mask, and the body looks swollen, sprouting three pairs of arms that hint at a horrific fusion of skeletons beneath the robes. While the other bosses guard bells or souls, Pinwheel is a thief. He stole the right of kindling from Gravelord Nito. But why? The popular theory isn't that he wanted power, but that he was trying to use necromancy to fix a tragedy. He was trying to resurrect his dead family, and in a weird mechanical failure, he accidentally welded them all together. The boss fight itself is a drop in expectations. He is frail, possessing some of the lowest hit points in the game, which makes the encounter feel bizarrely anticlimactic. But look at his behavior. He creates countless clones and teleports throughout the arena. He is a man who tried to play God to bring his family back, and instead turned them into a frantic, multi-armed mess. The item description of the masks provides a chilling glimpse into this amalgamation. One of the three masks of Pinwheel. This mask belongs to the mother, or father, or child. Slightly raises health or equipment load, or stamina. The weirdness is that these masks actually work. The fragments of the family are still supporting the host. If Pinwheel is a family compressed, then his master, Gravelord Nito, is an entire graveyard made manifest. As the first of the dead, his weirdness is rooted in the fact that he possesses no true singular body. He is a collective consciousness held together by a cloak of miasma and ancient shadow. He is not a skeleton in a traditional sense, but a mountain of them. Nito's physical form is riddled with weird deformities. It is immediately evident when you drop into his light-devouring tomb, you aren't standing before a singular entity, but a mass of hundreds of individual skeletons woven together into a shivering, mountainous frame. His right arm is not holding a weapon. Instead, it is the weapon. A massive blade forged from the bones of the dead, and his cloak is a literal fog of death that conceals thousands of skulls making up his torso, as though his body can never fully agree on what shape to be. Furthermore, the catacombs are filled with statues of a mother and child where spears erupt from the child's face. This could have either represented a mother dying of childbirth, a mother having a miscarriage, or a pregnant woman dying alongside her baby. It's therefore possible that Nito lost his own family during his own life. Visually, Nito is a mass of rags and stolen bones, but the core of his anatomy is an enigma. Beneath the minor skeletons that he wears like armor, Nito's frame is that of a giant. This suggests that Nito was a giant. I think he may have belonged to a race that predates both humanity and the gods. His domain, the Tomb of the Giants, which is one of the lowest points in the map, suggests that it was one of the first migration points for life emerging from Ash Lake. Interestingly, the name Nito bears a phonetic resemblance to the term neat, reflecting his reclusive, indifferent nature. Unlike Gwyn, who burns himself to remain relevant, Nito is content to slumber in a sarcophagus, indifferent to the world above. He is a boss defined by indifference, a god who has become a literal pile of discarded bones and shadow, proving that at the foundation of the world, the most weird find is a deity who has no ambition left but to remain as a graveyard. Weirdly enough, every major lord who received the Lord Souls has some form of magic associated with them that the player can use. The witches have pyromancies, Gwyn has his miracles, the pygmy is connected to dark sorceries and hexes, and Nito is the creator of necromancies, but the player is unable to learn or use them. But there is one final creature that completes the list of weird bosses, and that is the Four Kings. They were not born as gods, nor were they the primordial entities found in the flames. They were human leaders of New Londo, granted fragments of Lord Gwyn's soul as a reward for their stature. This is the first weirdness of their existence. They are an inversion of the divine gift. In their hands, the power of a god did not stabilize their rule. It acted as a weight that pulled them directly into the mouth of the abyss. The environment you fight in is weird. It's in the abyss, a bottomless plane devoid of normal physics, light, or landmarks. It is a literal manifestation of the absence. To even stand within this void, the player must utilize the Covenant of Artorias to acquire a ring that serves as the only way to enter this pit of void. Without it, the abyss does not merely kill you, it rejects your physical presence. They also provide some weird mechanical hurdles, because the abyss has no floor or horizon. It is nearly impossible for you to judge how far a king is. Players often find themselves swinging at empty air or being struck by a blade that looks miles away. Furthermore, they punish the very things players are taught to do, to keep their distance. To survive the Four Knights, you must embrace them. Their blades deal massive damage at the tip, but negligible damage at the hilt, forcing the player to press their body against these eldritch abominations in a desperate attempt just to stay alive. But here's the weirdest part of it all. We've looked at some really eccentric creatures and the divine failures, but eventually the flame is rekindled and the controller is set down. You then move on to other worlds and other adventures, yet somehow they all start to feel a bit thin. Why is it that after all these years, dozens of imitators and thousands of hours in other worlds, we keep coming back here? Why does every other challenging game feel like it's just trying to capture lightning that was bottled a decade ago? To understand this secret formula, take off your ring and step out of the void with me, as it's time to talk about the legacy. Because once you've experienced the perfect jagged edge of this masterpiece, you realize it can't get better than Dark Souls.